Africa World Hour, unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
And that's exactly what we do here on Africa World Hour. We bring you the voices, the faces, and the perspectives that matter from the heart of Africa to all corners of the globe. This time we talk about what's been part of public discourse from here, and of course, all across the world. U.S. President Donald Trump hailing conservative activist Charlie Kirk as a great American hero and martyr. That was during a speech to tens of thousands of mourners at a memorial service in Arizona. Trump was the headline speaker at a packed event on Sunday, which saw top officials from his administration, including Vice President J.D. Vance, praising Kirk's political legacy after he was shot dead on 10 September. Now, today we explore what is a really difficult question, and that is why does America mourn some deaths in the manner that it does? It barely notices others following various disparate outcries from a memorial of conservative activist Charlie Kirk, who, as we mentioned, hailed as a martyr, to historical examples such as George Wallace, who gets forgiveness but black victims rarely do. We ask whose lives are mourned and why. Joining us now is a journalist and commentator, Keith Boykin, who joins us from the US. Keith, a very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. Now, this particular conversation that we're having now was spurred on by an article shared to me by a friend. It was titled "On Indifference, Wallace, Kirk, and the Politics of Black Mourning." It was written by Janelle Hill, and I thought it would be an interesting conversation to have against the backdrop of this memorial for Charlie Kirk, your observations of what happened at the memorial and what exactly it was saying, especially around the issue of mourning in American politics.
Well, I think what we saw at the memorial service in Arizona was the whitewashing of a legacy of Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk was a podcaster, a right-wing activist, an associate of the president, Donald Trump here. And he was not universally known in America before he was shot and killed. He was known in political circles, and I was aware of him because I'm engaged in political circles as a journalist, but millions of Americans had never heard of him until he was shot and killed. And since that time, people have started to uncover and unearth some of the things he said. And many of those things are quite frankly offensive, especially to black people and people of color. And although the person who shot and killed Charlie Kirk, according to the police, the suspect, is not a black person, but a white man, a young white man, we as black people have become the targets for the vitriol from the right wing. Black preachers in their pulpits have been attacked and threatened because of their speech. Black colleges and universities, historically black colleges and universities, have been targeted with death threats and bomb threats. And people who have spoken out about the situation have been criticized, targeted, fired, and in some cases, as you know, removed from the air. So what I think the memorial service was an attempt to do was to create an image of Charlie Kirk as a martyr, as this Christian martyr who was standing up for good and right. But the legacy of his words contradicts that, because the people who actually quote what Charlie Kirk said end up being fired, criticized, harassed, or accused of taking his words out of context. I'll just give you some examples. These are some of the things that Charlie King said. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. does not deserve a national holiday. He has a holiday here in the United States in January. Charlie Kirk thinks that that was not necessary. Charlie Kirk thinks that, or he thought that, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which gave black people equal rights in the United States of America, was a mistake. He said that openly. He thought that Juneteenth, which is a holiday we celebrate here in the U.S. to commemorate the end of slavery, that is what he calls a racial complaining day. Charlie Kirk felt that George Floyd, a black person who was killed by police in the year 2020, in Minneapolis that George Floyd was a scumbag. And now he said this openly more than once. Now, well, this is the irony about this whole situation, that Charlie Kirk had the freedom to say whatever he wanted about black people, to criticize black people as being unqualified for the jobs, black pilots, black doctors, to criticize black intellectuals as being unintelligent or not smart, to criticize black celebrities as being weak or stupid.
And Keith, I want to jump in on exactly that point, the mourning, and how, as you say, those who are speaking out against an oppressive system, especially in which black lives are lost in a systemic, in fact, often expected type of way. Jimmy Kimmel was taken off air because of that. And I want to understand why there is an expectation that there shouldn't be black indifference to what we're seeing, a man who expressed openly racial bias.
Well, I think what they are trying to do is to create a sense of universality to Charlie Kirk's message. The idea that he was a beloved figure and that he actually was a Christian who wanted to help and welcome everyone. That was the message they tried to create at the memorial service. And his widow, Erica Kirk, even spoke in terms of forgiveness for the killer, by the way, who was a white man. I understand that. And as someone who was raised in the Christian tradition in the black churches here in America, we believe in forgiveness and redemption as well. But what we don't believe in is whitewashing the truth. And one of the examples we always point to in America in terms of our inability to move forward is how South Africa, in contrast to our country, actually created a Truth and Reconciliation Commission after apartheid. We never did that here in the United States. We never had any effort to go back and to study what took place, the horrors of slavery and legalized racial segregation, mass incarceration, and racial discrimination. We never examined any of that. We just pretended that it all disappeared and swept it under the rug. And that's what they're trying to do right now with Charlie Kirk. They're trying to pretend that his words didn't actually get said, that he didn't actually speak the horrible racist things he communicated. He actually said that he didn't believe that racism existed in America.
Now, I want to juxtapose, the racism, but the religious aspect to it as well, in recasting who Charlie Kirk is. And I was just looking at the commentary on X, and also there seems to be a whole a political theater of forgiveness being cast on the interaction between President Trump and Elon Musk. But I want to really understand what is really understood as forgiveness here, particularly as I mentioned the segregationist George Wallace. How does America as a whole, conceptualize this, process this? Who deserves forgiveness and who doesn't? And what are the standards?
Well, I have to start by saying that I did not read Jamel Hill's piece, so I'm not familiar with what she said, but I do know Jamel.
Yes, so just talk about it, yeah.
But I can speak on George Wallace generally.
Yes, that's what I would like.
George Wallace was a divisive political figure in America, a segregationist governor of the southern state of Alabama, and he was a unapologetic segregationist. He believed in the separation of the races. But George Wallace got forgiveness from black people in the 1970s after he was shot, I believe. He was shot but not killed in an assassination attempt. He got forgiveness from black people in part because he expressed some sort of contrition and apologized for what he said. I haven't heard that from Charlie Kirk. And even if he did apologize, I'm not sure that black people have an obligation to forgive people, or even if we do forgive, to allow them back into the public space just because they apologize for the things they did that are hurtful to us. I think there has to be some sort of consequences. From a religious point of view, we can still support the idea of forgiveness and redemption, But from a civil point of view, to move forward and to deny any sort of accountability when people do wrong to others is to create the conditions that enable that wrong to happen again. We've seen this in America time and time again. After slavery ended, we created rules and laws to help black people that lasted for 12 years in the period that we call Reconstruction. But immediately thereafter, America abandoned those principles and went back to doing what it was doing before. We saw it in the civil rights era where America made an attempt to try to address the concerns of black people when Dr. King was alive and his civil rights movement from 1955 roughly to 1968 when he was assassinated. But after that, America went right back to doing what it was doing before. And we see these periods of black success followed by white backlash. The historian Carol Anderson wrote a book called White Rage that describes this. And the most recent period is obviously the election of Barack Obama. He was a man who was elected in 2008, served as president from 2009 to 2017, the first and only black president in American history. And white people in America lost their minds about it. The large part of the reason why Donald Trump is president today is because he and millions of other white Americans could not stand the idea of having a black president. So Donald Trump was the one who started the campaign, or he didn't. If he didn't start it, he certainly exploited it for 5.5 years, accusing Barack Obama of not being a lawful citizen of the United States. And so this is what I'm talking about when I say there is a double standard. That black people, we're expected to forgive all the transgressions committed against us, but white Americans can act as though forgiveness is not expected of them. Whether it's civil perspective or religious Christian perspective, they can just assume, like Donald Trump does, that hatred and vengeance and jealousy and evil are acceptable forms of response.
I need to end with this question, and just looking at how not only America markets itself, certainly that's what Donald Trump does very well, the picture of America as this benevolent, blameless nation. James Baldwin wrote about it when he spoke about the lie of American innocence. And I just want to pick your brain on how does this reaction to Kirk's death exemplify the lie in practice for America going forward?
Well, one of the biggest lies, there's so many lies, but one of the biggest lies is that America is not a violent country. And we hear a lot of politicians on the left and right make that claim whenever there's an act of political violence or an act of high-profile violence. And I think that's obviously a lie. America was founded on violence from the point of the extermination and genocide of the indigenous people to the enslavement of the African-American people to the fact that we are the only country in the world to actually use nuclear weapons on civilian population, which we did in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we meaning the United States government in 1945, at the end of World War II. And so America has a long history of violence, of colonialism and of genocide and of being involved in imperialism across the planet, not to mention South Africa, supporting the apartheid regime in South Africa during the Reagan era and before. So I think that the mythology of America is the mythology that white America wants to believe that we are, as Ronald Reagan once said, a shining city on the hill, this exceptional city, the exceptional country that can stand alone and defend values of humanity and justice. And we've never been that. And I think we, as those of us who are African American, those of us who are on the left, those of us who are part of minority communities in this country, we've always known that. But I think the people who are in the majority have been so reluctant to confess the obvious, as James would say, that they're finally coming to terms with the reality. They just have to lie about it. And James Baldwin presciently said back in the 1950s that this idea of white privilege and white supremacy doesn't only victimize black people. It victimizes white people as well, because it forces them into a lie that they can't sustain perpetually either.
Thank you so much for speaking to us, Keith, for that conversation. You sharing your thoughts around what is happening in the U.S., particularly around how Charlie Kirk is being memorialized. We're talking also about the concept of a black mourning. What does it mean, particularly against the backdrop of those who lose their lives through a violent system? Keith, thank you very much for your time once again, and that comes to the end of this conversation. Keith Boykin he's speaking to us in LA. He's a journalist and commentator. And we're going to look now at one of my passion projects, which is rhinos. We're going to talk about World International Rhino Day.